Andrew, what do you like about reading?
I like getting so into a book that I miss my stop.
And don't come home for an hour?
Sometimes. And sometimes the book isn't good, and then I get off a stop early.
Oh goodness.
And Crystal, what do you like about reading?
I like that I can go through a bag of popcorn and not feel guilty about it.
Just a bag of popcorn?
Maybe a bag of chips, too.
Do you have a little chocolate stain in the corner of your mouth?
Yeah, and maybe a little smear of chocolate around the mouth. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Goldilocks and the Three Cares podcast. This is the podcast that looks at what's too hot, too cold, and just right with a direct published book. I'm Crystal.
And I'm Andrew. And Crystal, if you're talking, what does that mean?
It means you read a book, Andrew.
A second book.
Surprise.
Congratulations. I have a gold star.
You do on your little
Let's
chart.
put it on the fridge.
Yes. So, since you read a book, Andrew, what did we read this week?
This was a request. Author Jeremy Vaeni reached out to us to read Into the End, which is a standalone book. Shocking. We're not reading book one in the series.
Yeah, it's a little unusual for us.
It's refreshing to read something that wraps up.
Is it? Can you tell us a little bit about the plot?
This was an interesting concept, and it is a longer book than we normally read because there was quite a bit to get through. I'll sum it up this way. This is Jeremy's attempt to write the unifying theory of the supernatural and the paranormal. So how do you make a world of ESP and other existence in planes and lizard people and UFOs and zombies and ghosts and dragons and hold on, there's more, dwarves and the Slender Man and
basically
the Men in Black.
Supernatural or paranormal or fantasy element ever created.
If you tune into the History Network past 1 a.m., whatever's on, it's just mushed together. And there's 3 plot lines. An omnipresent point of view that explains the world and explains the history and has the payoff at the very end. The story of, the Man in Black, I'm going to call him, and where's that character coming from, Henry. And then it starts off as kind of a Stand By Me with a bunch of boys, but, something happens and there's one lead protagonist, Corey, who is ultimately the pawn in this game, this end game that's explained between all the different sides.
That sounds a little heavy.
There's a lot to it.
And I think that moves us quite nicely.
Yeah.
I do say so myself, into what was too hot about this book.
So as I described, there's the 3 plot lines, and what ends up happening is it becomes too much too soon. The very first page tells about the omnipresent point of view and starts doing the world building and all of that, and it doesn't really entice the reader into that. You have to buy into the premise from literally the first paragraph on the first page. And if you do, then you get the payoff at the end, but it's very much a very early decision point for the reader on, am I in or not?
So he's asking you to believe too much too soon.
Yeah, and there's 2 kinds of different styles of books. There's the books that come to you that are very, very easy to read. And then there's the books that you have to come to that are a little more difficult to read and that require a little bit more investment at the beginning. There is no right way to do this, frankly, but this definitely came across as you have to buy in. And if you do, awesome. If you don't, you're going to struggle through this.
So some examples, we were talking about
television,
TV shows. So Mad Men. Mad Men's definitely a show that asks you to come to it. If you don't watch it...
Breaking Bad was boring the first 3 seasons.
Right. You
had to go to it for season 4 and 5 and later and 6 to really have an effect. Whereas Big Bang Theory's easy to watch. How I Met Your Mother is easy to watch. These sitcoms, 2.5 Men, comes right to your front doorstep and drops off entertainment. You don't need to be challenged by it.
So in that case, in order to make this subject a little less hot for this particular novel, what sort of approach would you suggest?
And this is purely stylistic opinion. That omnipresent point of view might have been better told from more of a first person, or might have been better explored through maybe the Men in Black character, Henry, him kind of learning about that world, because he ultimately does do quite a bit to change the outcome of the plot. So yeah, maybe just burying that information in instead of doing every 2 or 3 chapters an interlude with this omnipresent point of view.
What about what was too cold?
My favorite characters and the characters that I think were probably the strongest in the book, and that is saying something because there were a lot of strong characters, appeared much later on in the book than I would have normally figured. The primary character, Corey, it takes about 3/4 of the book before he actually starts affecting the outcome of the plot. He's largely a participant, whereas Henry and the love interest and the supernatural commander character, they're much more interesting characters, but, they don't come in either until much later in the book or aren't really fully realized as characters until much later in the book.
So that brings up a good question. Mm-hmm. Is the main character Corey then, in your opinion? Is he actually the main character?
No, I think my main character is probably Henry, because he's the one who goes through the greatest amount of change, at least in the early part of the book, going from his previous life to suddenly falling into this program that he's involved with, and how that allows him to have the insight into this other world and why this battle's happening.
I think when you're trying to define who is actually the main character in something, it's always good to look at how much action they're actually, how much action do they personally take.
Yeah.
Because if they're sort of an observer, mm-hmm. They tend to be not seen as the main character. Like Snow White and the Huntsman.
Oh,
we're going with the movie here, apparently. Yeah. Snow White is
not the main character.
Petting animals and running around, and the Huntsman is actually doing all the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, he's the main character.
Yeah, your protagonist has to be the one that's advancing the plot, or else you're just a passenger.
So what would you say was just right about this book?
This is an extremely well-written book. The dialogue is fantastic. It's believable from especially the younger characters in terms of how they interact. And
did you feel like you were camping, Andrew?
It felt a little Stand By Me.
Did it?
It was a little Stand By Me-ish. Yeah, it was very real and very realized, and it fit the characters well. All the characters had their own voices, so you could tell who was talking, especially in the back and forth dialogue. And the description was really, really well done. I mean, my fondness for...
Yes, I do.
For comparisons.
Yeah.
And for similes, really drawing the visual elements into it. And
were they really unique similes and metaphors? Were they?
They were. I mean, there was a lot of comparative. So something that's non-energetic, comparing it to something that's energetic, like lightning, and something that's very subdued, comparing it to something that's much more fast-moving, or vice versa. I thought was really, really well done. There was also a lot of asking, having the character, as part of the description, ask themselves a question that rhetorically they wouldn't be able to have an answer to, but we all know goes on in our mind, like, what is going on here? Or why is that there? And that sort of a thing, more showing, not telling, as opposed to the character going, why is that in the corner? The character would, that's over there, and then would have a dialogue thought, have a description thought, at the end would say, and why is that there? So I thought that was extraordinarily well done. It's also really tightly edited. We read a lot of direct published books, and there's,
yes,
spaces between words and periods and paragraphs being off. This was really, really well done. So hats off to Jeremy's team. It was tight.
Because we usually notice that there's always going to be the occasional spelling, as you said, different spaces, but it's just what I like to call tight, in that there's no word that doesn't need to be there.
It doesn't bump me. Right, so there's nothing that's there that I need to worry about.
So back to the dialogue. Why did you enjoy the dialogue so much? What about the dialogue made it so good?
And this is a really good question. I think I'm jealous.
Again?
Andrew's jealous. I'm jealous because the dialogue was a lot of short sentences. There wasn't a lot of long-winded characters going on. it was very, 4, 5, 10 words where you needed to be moving it along. Oh, yes, over there. That sort of a thing that allowed the characters to move through, and you didn't experience the plot through the dialogue like you do a lot of books. You experienced the plot through the plot.
Who would you recommend read this book, Andrew?
I would recommend anyone who's big into, the supernatural, the paranormal. If you know what cryptozoology is, or you've at one point correctly pronounced ufologist.
You have? We can take that off the list for you.
I watched History Network after 1 a.m.
Excellent. And where can you find this book?
Ebook, available Amazon and a variety of other web-based channels.
Where can you find Goldilocks and the Three Cares?
A couple places. Go to www.everythingstemporary.com. It's our blog and site. You can subscribe through iTunes, Goldilocks and the Three Cares. Also now on YouTube.
Very good.
And our Twitter is Everything Temp, and Facebook is Everything's Temporary. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you did.
There were 4 takes.
There were. Thank you again for listening to Goldilocks and the Three Cares. This was our overview of Into the End by Jeremy Vaeni. We want to thank Jeremy for reaching out to us and asking us to do a review of his book. If you like what you hear, please do subscribe. Please follow. And if you have any recommendations of books that you think we should read, or any requests yourself, please feel free to drop us a line and let us know. Until next time.
Like and subscribe.
Oh, you changed it. Keep reading.
And Crystal, what do you like about reading?
Mine's a funny one, so you go first.
Andrew, what do you like about reading?